Hi there, friends. I wanted to do a follow-up video from my diversity conversation from the other day. And partly because I got a request to do a quick walkthrough of the World Spirit Tarot. But also I wanted to share a few decks that I think diversity is not an issue in them, or they actually do a good job of addressing diversity. Sadly, there are more decks where it's not really an issue because there aren't people in them. But I just, it's something to continue the conversation about. I appreciate the really respectful comments I've gotten so far, and I'm going to reply to them. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. This also may be one of my last videos for the foreseeable few weeks. I'm away next week, and then after that, I'm away for 6 weeks for my grad school residency. So this may be my finale for June, July. I'll be around and responding and on Instagram and Facebook, but maybe I probably won't have time to do videos. So I just want to throw that out there. If you notice that I've disappeared, then it's not that I've gone away forever. It's just that I am doing my 6-week residency. It's a really intensive 6 weeks. So anyway, let me start by looking at the World Spirit Tarot. Now, this version of this deck is out of print, but the authors did self-publish a reprint, and there are a few changes that they've made, and I don't have that new version. So I know that the Sun card is different. There are a few cards that were reconstructed, redesigned. So that's worth knowing, but by and large, I think the deck is largely what it is. This was, for me, kind of the golden age of Llewellyn decks, because they made a handful of these mini kits. The Nigel Jackson was another one, was the only one that I had, and I traded my Nigel Jackson recently because I just wasn't using it, and I know how popular it was, and people really love it. So this is what it came, the deck, and then it came with a book, but it wasn't your little white book. You know, it was a fairly, you see more books like this now with indie decks, but this was sort of like pre-indie decks. So it was a pretty good book. Not as like substantial as the guidebooks of the larger kits, but it was also like a really, for lack of a better term, it was a really shelf-stable system for dealing with decks. And the boxes were decent. And they fit the cards in them, and it wasn't like you needed to find a solution. This is not the copy of the deck that I use, actually. I have another one that I've used more, and it's actually a little bit worn out, which is why I'm showing this one. But the packaging I thought was really good. So I'm just going to walk through it. I mentioned that there were a couple problematic cards, and they're actually not that problematic for me. They just, they feel slightly on the stereotypical side. But the other thing to think about is this is almost a 20-year-old deck. Like, I think it came out in 2001. Is that in here? (2001). So, I got it when it came out, and it was the only thing like it at the time. And the art I always thought was really beautiful. It's linoleum. I'm going to zoom in and move the camera. It's linoleum block print, which is sort of like a modern adaptation of woodcuts, but it's more elegant than woodcuts are. So this is the Fool. This is Rider-Waite-Smith through and through, with some clever modernizations. But as you'll see, it's a really diverse iteration of Rider-Waite-Smith. And, just looking at it again, I sort of feel all the affection I felt for it when it originally came out. So this is the Fool. Rather a departure from Rider-Waite-Smith, because you've got someone up on the roof chasing birds, but that's that sense of freeness and not necessarily worrying about the outcome, and in a light position, you could say this person will fly away with the birds, and in a shadow position, they'll fall, they'll fall like the Fool will. The back of the card, I think, may have changed. I'm not sure, but it was this light and shadow thing. So, reversed represented the shadow aspect of the card. Upright represented the light version of it, which was nice. So here's the Magician. Bit more of a shamanic feeling. sort of juggling all of these elements in this sort of raffia enclosure. The major difference is we don't have the table, but we have this sense of kind of juggling all the elements. The High Priestess is a big departure from Rider-Waite-Smith. We don't have the water quality there, but we do have this really sort of pagan circle, midnight quality to it, which I actually really like. Another thing that I really liked about this deck is that there's not a whole lot of Christian imagery. This is the Empress, nature, almost sort of a really feline quality to her. But we have the water, we have the earth, we have, this sense of fertility and pregnancy, and really kind of this beautiful, like, pre-modern, like, stately nudity, and there is nudity in this deck, but at no point is it ever gratuitous, I don't think. The Emperor is very different, but you have him kind of ruling over the land. The Hierophant is very Rider-Waite-Smith with sort of an indigenous feel to it. The Lover's card, very different. This is a card that is sort of religiously inclusive, if I remember correctly in the book. It's been so many years since I've looked at this, but I think I remember in the little book. God's playful Pan and peaceful Kuan Yin preside over the pair. So, it's sort of meant to bring in energies from different religious traditions or mythologies. The kind of, you can't quite tell the gender of the characters in the deck. They have sort of a feminine feeling to them, but not exclusively. And obviously we have sort of, as you can see even so far in the first 6 cards, kind of an array of racial experiences. So here's the Chariot. Very standard, but with this sort of African feel to it, with the zebras. I've always really liked the Strength card. Yeah. I think the art in this deck is really beautiful, and the coloring of it, which I don't think you'll find sort of reflected well in my video, is especially beautiful. This Hermit card is really beautiful. So it is linoleum block print. It was carved out, printed, and then colored. So not ultimately all that different from woodblock, but there's an elegance to these that you get because I think linoleum is a bit more supple than wood, and you're not at the mercy of its grain. And so the artist, Lauren O'Leary, managed to just get a fluidity that you don't necessarily get with woodblock. Here's the Wheel of Fortune. We've got Pan there. Again, I don't want to... The book is included in the new edition of this too. Under a shining sun and moon, a great stone wheel is turned by a goddess and a god. 3 figures ride round on it, each at a different stage in life. A young woman tied to the wheel descends as a wizened crown hanging by one binding rise. A young woman tied to the wheel descends as a wizened crown hanging by one binding rises. I don't know what that means. Since their eyes are shielded, neither can see what lies ahead. At the top of the wheel, a baby crawls toward the sun. 1 drop of vibrant elixir falls from the wheel to the earth. So that's the wheel. Justice I always thought was really beautiful in this deck. Again, not revolutionary in its iteration, but, just sort of fresh. There's a freshness to it, even though now this deck is 20 years old. The Hanged Man brings in Norse mythology. A muscular young man hangs from a bough of the Yggdrasil, the sacred tree of Norse mythology, suspended from one ankle by a cord of flowers. He holds a staff decorated with bits of shell, bone, and feather. As his eyes look within, his expression is peaceful. His hair spreads out into the pool of water below him, swirling with symbols and patterns forming in the ripples. The death card, this was the first death card that used a phoenix, as far as I have seen. But what one gets without the kind of Christian mythology is sort of the supplicants of all the human forms, and then the kind of triumph of the pyre, of the phoenix. But out of that isn't sort of end. It's from the ashes comes newness. So it's a very sort of modern progressive feel. Temperance. Devil, fairly traditional, but very, very, very full in its nudity. You can't, maybe you can see it. Yeah, you can. But I don't think the nudity is necessarily gratuitous. The Tower card was interesting to me because you're seeing it from above, but again, the energy is still it's very traditional. Star. I always loved the coloring of the moon. This card has definitely changed from this sort of jacked baby with the military inspired haircut. I know that this is different, and I know that will make people happy. This, I think, always has been the least popular card in the deck, and I can understand why. It's a bit odd, but you still get the sense of joy, and it's a happy jacked baby. Judgment. Here we have Egyptian mythology. Now, I will be fully honest, been a giant fan of Egyptian imagery and tarot, in part because I know that tarot has no relationship to Egyptian. But in this case, we get Anubis, jackal-headed god of the Egyptian underworld, looms over a crowd of waiting souls. Each will have their moment of reckoning, their lives measured against his feather of truth. What I like about this particular judgment card, rather than the angel of the more Christian mythology, is that the story of having, your heart weighed against, something, is so, there's something that's more kind of lovely to me about that Egyptian mythology than the kind of trumpeting angel of my, Christian past. So again, it's a nice line they managed to draw. The thing about this deck too is that I don't feel like they were frivolous and if you're a devotee of Rider-Waite-Smith, I don't feel like the lines they drew are unclear, and I also don't think that they didn't go like willy-nilly with it. So here's the universe instead of the world, but again, very familiar imagery. But of course, they chose different beings for the four corners. And again, let me see if they talk about a full-bodied woman poises on the head of a great celestial serpent. Planets circle around her. She wears a girdle of stars, and her long hair streams down her ankles. Like the Hindu god Shiva, she dances the world into existence with pleased concentration. Animal totems of the four suits surround her. The placid cow for earth, the clever crow for air, the mighty lion for fire, and the sensitive dolphin for water. So that's the major arcana. I'll go through the minor arcana. They are pentacles, swords, cups, and pentacles, swords, cups, and wands right in front of me. Again, they're very Rider-Waite-Smith with multicultural edge. So here we have the Two of Wands, the Three of Wands, the Four of Wands. So you can see how Rider-Waite-Smith this really is. The Six, the Seven, the 8, 9, and 10. I mentioned in my previous video that I found some of the cards in this deck problematic, and so far I haven't actually seen any that I felt like were. So maybe I was remembering something else. Now, the thing about this deck, I've talked about this many times in many of my videos, that this deck really taught me how to read the court cards, because rather than Page, Knight, King, and Queen, they have Seer, Seeker, Sibyl, and Sage. And I always really liked that. So here's the Seer of Wands. This would be the page. The Seeker of Wands would be the Knight. The Sibyl of Wands is the Queen. And the Sage of Wands is the King. So that's the suit of Wands. And then in the suit of Cups, again, very Rider-Waite-Smith, but sort of minus the Christian iconography. So there's the Ace. This is the Two of Cups. This is one I always felt was slightly stereotypical somehow. It just looked a little... to me, back in 2001, looked like it was an Indigo Girls concert. But it's still, again, what you don't have necessarily as a man and a woman. You have two sort of gender-neutral folks. Or two women, if you want to look at it that way. The Three of Cups is really nice because rather than people sort of dancing with cups, you've got these three stages of life and three different women. And again, it's a very body positive deck. The nudity in it sort of celebrates all shapes and not sort of, hustler ads, for example. It's a weird reference for me to pull out. Here's the Four of Cups. But again, it's all very Rider-Waite-Smith. Five of Cups. The Six. The Seven. There's a little bit less of a kind of a nasty sense of overwhelm with the Seven of Cups and more kind of like a meditative, almost sort of hallucinogenic quality to this one. The Eight of Cups. The 9. And the 10. And again, if you think about the Rider-Waite-Smith, it's very, very similar, but we have multinationalities. We have, this isn't your sort of nuclear family of Rider-Waite-Smith. So it's a nice adjustment. The Seer of Cups is Pamela Coleman Smith, which, I love decks that put a little nod to Pixie. Because love or hate the Rider-Waite-Smith, you can't argue that she changed the face of tarot. And, maybe without that deck, many of us would never have come to it. This is the Seeker of Cups. The Sibyl of Cups. And the Sage of Cups. In the suit of Swords, there's the Ace. The 2. I like this 3. I like that it's not the typical 3 hearts, 3 swords shoved into a heart. And it seems to have a lot of layers to it. So it's harder to sort of sum up as just sort of heartbreak, which I kind of like. The 4 of Swords. The 5 of Swords. The 6. The 7. 8. 9, very traditional. And 10, very different. There's, let me see if she describes it in the book. Here we go. The Egyptian god Osiris was murdered by his brother, the dog-headed Set, after a long-standing rivalry. In this scene, Set thrusts sword after sword into the body of his brother, who lies with his hands bound as the waters of the Nile lap at his ankles. Behind him, in the red light of the sun, stands the god Isis. As the sun sets on her husband's life, she raises her arms in supplication to the powers that will eventually resurrect him. So a bit more of a hopeful iteration, although, still pretty grim. Here's the Seer of Swords. The Seeker. The Sibyl. And the Sage. And then finally the Suit of Pentacles, there's the Ace. The 2. The 3. 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then we have the Seer of Pentacles, the Seeker of Pentacles, the Sibyl of Pentacles, oops, and the Sage. So that's the World Spirit deck. Again, I don't know exactly what cards other than the Sun were changed, but this was the first deck that I remember as being sort of inclusive of different races and gender identities and sexualities and such. And again, this was 20 years ago. I haven't seen a whole lot since. But what I do have to share with you are just a handful of decks that I think are by and large sort of not problematic if you're looking at things from this point of view. From a diversity point of view. Let's see. The first one that I'm going to pull out here is... I guess this is in no particular order. All of these decks have had walkthroughs, so I'm not going to do walkthroughs of them fully, but I'll just sort of share with you some elements of them. These are just things from my collection too that I use. They're not necessarily the only ones out there, although I have been on the prowl and I haven't seen a whole lot, but there obviously are ones that I've missed over the years that were independently published that I never got, or vice versa. One of the ones that I didn't pull is the Wild Unknown. Again, it's not one of the things about these decks overall is that they're not necessarily diverse per se. It's that they lack people in them. But the first one that I grabbed here was the Raven's Prophecy deck. There aren't a lot of people in this deck. There are a lot of hands, and the hands do tend to be white. But it's not a people-focused deck, and because of that, it tends to be sort of more easy from a diversity standpoint, because what you're not super aware of is an abundance of whiteness. There are a lot of animals. There's a lot of... I actually really love this deck. I don't use it much, but I think it's a... kind of a really great one. So that's one idea, or one deck that is in my collection. Another is the Idiosyncratic, which I worry may be sold out. I'm not sure if it is yet. This is the second printing of it. Again, it's another deck that lacks people in it. And so what you don't have to worry about is diversity, because there's nothing to be diverse about. So I didn't, this was a deck I really wanted, and then got it and didn't want it anymore, and then it suddenly popped up on my radar again a couple weeks ago, and I was glad that I didn't give it away. So so that's one. Another one that I pulled is the Tarot of Trees. Again, another deck without people in it. Because it's all trees. And so, again, diversity isn't so much an issue in this deck because there's no one in it. I don't read reversals, but this deck constantly creates them. This deck wants reversals, I guess. So Tower of Trees is another one, and it's a deck I really like. It's also small, which is nice because it's easy to carry around. Another deck that I pulled out was the Voyager Tarot, which is one that people really don't like. I do, but I, again, don't use it all that much. It's a collage deck, so I understand why people don't like it. But actually, the thing about this as a collage deck is because it is collage in the traditional sense. I don't find it as creepy as I do some collage decks because it's not... the collages aren't trying to look like anything other than collages. And there's a lot of imagery from around the world in it. So this is a fairly diverse deck because it transcends sort of times and places and eras, and you know what I mean. It's got a lot of diversity in it for that reason. There's a store in New York on 14th Street called Namaste, and they have a tarot reader there who only uses that deck, and he's sort of known for using that deck. I pulled the this is a deck everyone knows. I think this is the Shadowscapes deck. This is not a super diverse deck, but in a sense, because the people in it aren't necessarily human, the sort of humanoid characters, but for that reason, it actually makes it a bit less problematic from that point of view, because it's very clear that they're not meant to be human. It's a fantasy deck, and as such, the skin tones tend to be very different, but they can, be blue as well as white, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of, it is fairly white, but it's also fairly inspired by Asian influences. So in that sense, it's not straight up Caucasian, you know what I mean? But the figures in it are largely kind of fantasy figures. So another beautiful deck. This used to be kind of the only deck I used for a long time. But as always happens, that changes. Oh, I left one of them over there. Let's see. This is the German version of the Margareta Peterson. I think again, this is a pretty popular deck. Again, because its style is so abstracted, it's not, you don't get a sense of like whiteness. I really love the art in this deck. What I have not done is spent much time learning the German names. And I know there's an English version of the deck, but I got this deck again probably 15 years ago. And it was not, it was 2001. It was not an inexpensive purchase, because at the time, sort of, I don't remember that it was super expensive, but it was not the cheapest deck I had, at the time. And I don't want to buy another copy of it, but I should learn it because it's so, it's so beautiful. This is the Chima Net Tarot. Again, another deck where the human figures in it are not necessarily that shouldn't be shuffled in there, exclusively human, but like the Shadowscapes, while that's the case where there are human forms, they do tend to be white-ish, not exclusively, as you can see, and there are a lot of sort of animal energies and fantasy elements to it, and so in that regard, I feel like it has the inkling of more diversity. But when I looked at decks that I think do a good job of this, I think that many of them nod toward doing a good job without exclusively going fully into the realm of diversity. I remember thinking the Shadowscapes, the Fountain Tarot was really diverse, and then when I went and looked at it, it nods, you know what I mean, towards diversity. I'm gonna reach over, but it doesn't sort of go fully into it. That's a pretty white deck. Now this is a black and white deck, with sort of an abstracted feel to it. This is the Heart and Hands Tarot. Really large cards. And you'd say, looking at the images, how can you tell? Because they're black and white. There's just a quality of diversity to this deck, that, you sort of feel, a diversity to it. And also because it is a black and white deck, it's easier not to get caught up in the idea of it being diverse or not. So this is a really big I don't use this one much because it's so difficult for me to shuffle. And I've seen some trimmed versions of this, but I'm afraid to trim it because there's no sort of clear delineate. You know, you could kind of trim the black off the edge, but I've just been too scared. I think Veronica Jude trimmed it. Maybe Kelly from The Truth and Story trimmed it too. But I've just been too nervous, and so it stays on my shelf, awaiting either my bravery in trimming it or some other thing. The one thing I'll say about this deck too is both the box and the bag it came in are really super tight, and it's not like the most like user friendly in that regard. There's one more I want to talk about, which I don't see around much anymore, but I believe it's still in print. And again, like most things, it's okay. This may be among the most diverse, and I did use this deck for a while. I've sort of stopped. I don't love the art in it, like the style of the art. This is the Ancestral Path Tarot, which is a US Games deck. And I did use this a lot for readings for other people. Back a lot when I was sort of in one of my modes of reading for the American Tarot Association's free sites. This is a fairly diverse deck because it takes its cue from 4 parts of the world and their mythologies. I think Egypt, or Africa specifically, there's Asian influence. I think there's Native American influence and maybe Norse influence or like Celtic influence. So this is a really nice deck, and Rider-Waite-Smith inspired. The majors are fairly broadly multicultural, but then each of the 4 suits, I don't have the little white book, which did describe it a little bit more. I think each of the 4 suits, like I believe Cups is sort of Arthurian or Celtic. Wands, I think, is African. Swords is Asian. And Pentacles, I don't know if it's Pentacles in this deck. Pentacles are Native American? So the nice thing about this is that it is Rider-Waite-Smith. It's a nice size, and it's very diverse in many ways. I have not seen a single Pentacle card. So this, I mean, it's hard to deny that this is a beautiful deck. If you look at the tower, it sort of spans like Stonehenge, the Sphinx, that maybe the Parthenon, and like Notre Dame Cathedral, and then like a skyscraper. Sacred Circles is the Pentacles card. Which does have a Native American feel to it, or like an Indigenous American. So, the Ancestral Path Tarot, older even than the World Spirit, although I think I got the World Spirit first. I never saved little white books when I was young and reckless, and so now I have no idea. Although I think if you were to look at the Eclectic Tarot Forum or something, they might tell you. But anyway, so anyway, that's a walkthrough of the World Spirit, and then a handful of fairly diverse or people-free decks. If this is something that intrigues you. The other thing I would say is that if there are decks out there that you know are particularly diverse and that I didn't mention, let me know, because I probably will want to look at them. Decks I could have thrown in here and didn't were like the Prisma Visions. The Prisma Visions isn't, because it's sort of a fantasy deck, it's not specifically heterosexual, it's not specifically white. Oh, the Wooden Tarot I can see from here I could have pulled out, because that has no people in it. I could have pulled that out too. There's walkthroughs of that deck. I looked at the Line Strider because I thought, oh, well, that's a pretty like muted deck, but I didn't find it especially diverse. So anyway, these are just some thoughts off the top of my head, sort of continuing my initial conversation. But let me know if I missed something I should look at. And the deck that I couldn't remember the name of in the previous video was the Numinous Tarot. And again, I linked that website in that video. So if you want to check that out, check that video out. I will wrap this up because, as always, I've gone on longer than I meant to. But I hope this was interesting and useful, and I hope you're well.